Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel today, the storytelling process behind music composition. My name is Rin. I'm a current master's student in the Scoring for Film, Television, and Video Games program here at Berkeley, and I'm going to be moderating our discussion today. We have two wonderful guests with us today, and I'm going to introduce them to you by just reading a little bit from their bios before we jump right into some conversation. So first we have with us Perrine Virgile. She is a French TV and film composer based in Los Angeles. In addition to being the longtime scoring assistant and additional writer for composer Jeff Russo, working on projects such as Hulu's The Act and Netflix's Cursed, she recently co-composed the second season of Netflix's hit show, The Umbrella Academy. Beyond film scoring, Perrine's music has been featured in concert, including two premieres in The Future is Female concert series, an upcoming premiere at the Endless Mountain Film Festival, and an orchestral album that will be released soon. Thank you so much for joining us, Perrine.
Thank you for having me.
We also have with us here Antonio Sanchez, who is one of the most sought after drummers in the international jazz scene, with close to a dozen recordings as leader and solo artist. He has recorded and performed with artists like Chick Corea and Gary Burton, as well as being a longtime collaborator of Pat Metheny. His many awards include 4 Grammys, one of which was won for his iconic drum solo score for the film Birdman, or The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance. Thank you so much for joining us, Antonio.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now, there are so many different ways to get into the media scoring industry, and I know that's a question that myself and many of my peers have for a lot of composers. So I was wondering if you could each tell us kind of what the key stepstones were on your way to where you are now. And maybe we can start with you, Perrine.
Sure. I went to Berklee College of Music, but I went to the Boston campus. And after I graduated, I moved to LA because it felt like it was the right city to pursue film scoring. And I got into an internship with Jeff Russo pretty fast. I actually got it through the Berkeley alumni program. They helped me find an internship. And then from there, I kind of graduated, to the position I'm in now. I worked pretty hard for 5 to 6 years now. At first, I was just an intern, and then I became kind of like a personal assistant. And then I started doing some arrangements here and there. And then, now we're co-crediting each other on projects, So yeah, that's kind of my path to get where I am.
Wonderful. And Antonio, your path was a little bit different to getting towards film scoring, that's correct?
Couldn't have been more different than Perrine's, because obviously she was seeking it. For me, it was an absolute accident. Film scoring never really was in my radar. I love film. I love film music, but I was so concentrated. I was also at the Berkeley campus in Boston, and I was so concentrated on playing drums that everything else, was not important at the time. And then, I started composing and doing my own band leading endeavors. And this all happened because Alejandro González Iñárritu, I met him through in a concert after a performance with Pat Metheny in Los Angeles. And because he's Mexican and I'm Mexican, we had that connection, obviously. And also he was a DJ in Mexico City. And I loved the music he would program. So we also had the musical connection. And then when he started thinking about doing this movie Birdman, because of our connection, he thought of me, and I think it really stood in his head. That concert that he went to see, he really liked it, and he just asked me to score it. I was thrilled and terrified, obviously, at the same time, to score something like that for the first time. And then after that experience happened, then I started getting other calls, and then slowly but surely, I started really digging the process and digging the prospects of making more music for visual media.
Yeah, and Birdman in particular, it's such a score to be your first ever score. I mean, it's both in like what it ended up being in relation to the film and how you approached writing the music. It's so unique. And I'm very curious kind of what the process was speaking with your director and figuring out what that was going to be.
I mean, it was one of the most unorthodox, approaches to doing something. because in the beginning I wanted to approach it like if it was, a film composer and then compose drum themes for different things for each one of the actors, for action, for more peaceful scenes, pensive, etc. And I sent him some demos, and he said, I love them, they're amazing, but they're exactly the opposite of what I'm looking for. So he basically wanted me to improvise because he saw me as a jazz musician, and he saw the movie, sprinkled with improvisation in a way. So our first meeting was actually in the recording studio, and we had absolutely nothing to look at but the script. So then he started explaining the scenes to me in great detail, and he just had me improvise after what he had just explained, basically what he was thinking of the scenes. And I asked him if he could sit in front of me while he was doing this, and then I asked him to imagine the scene in his head while I was improvising, and for him to raise his hand every time something happened in the scene, so that I knew that, okay, somebody opened the door, because of everything that he had just explained to me. And now he's walking through the hallway, and he kept going like this, and I kept changing my improvisation accordingly. And we did the whole movie like that. Then they superimposed those demos over the rough cut of the film. Then they showed me that, and then we redid everything. Some things based on the things that he had really liked about the improvisations. Some things we changed, but now it was all looking at picture now. So it was those two different sessions. But it was a very strange, the whole thing, to do it like that, except that for me as a jazz musician, it was very natural to improvise. It was just to visual media instead of with a band or something like that.
Right. And has that kind of improvisatory method of writing transferred to your later film projects as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when it comes to drums. So then after that, I did the series Get Shorty. And that was basically the same process. I would look at the scene a few times and then do a few passes and then tighten it up as I was doing it, and then send the producers 3 or 4 different versions, and then they usually liked one of them. And then I did a film last year, and there was a lot more involved. It was just not drums, but the scenes that were very drum heavy, I always start with improvisation, and then I start building around that. So yeah, the same process has helped me, obviously, because that's what I feel like is my strength to do that. Some other people's have completely different strengths, obviously, and that's what they exploit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think that's so cool. But of course, Perrine, you are, I would imagine, one of the less improvisatory composers, because you not only are you writing for larger ensembles, at least based on what I've heard in Umbrella Academy, but you're working collaboratively, you're co-composing, or you're doing additional writing. So I'd be very interested specifically kind of on how you collaborate with Jeff Russo, and what you think, if at all, there was any change between when you were credited as kind of additional writing on season 1 of Umbrella Academy versus being a co-composer on season 2.
Sure. Well, in season 1, we worked very closely together. We wrote themes together, and we kind of discussed about the direction, about the show, and like what kind of music the showrunner wanted to have. And in season 1, the main difference is that I wasn't participating with this conversation with the showrunner and the people. I was just kind of like in the back, hiding in the cave. But for season 2, what was nice is that I was a bit more part of those conversations, which is always a bit frustrating when you're doing additional writing, is that you don't have that communication with someone, which can be really helpful, when you write music, because sometimes you just want to ask questions, or you have you want to know more about a direction, and when you write additional music, sometimes you don't have access to that kind of communication. So it was nice for season 2 to be able to do that, and our collaboration didn't really change from season 1 to season 2 with Jeff. We kind of wrote the show the same way. It was just a bit more visibility for me with the people in charge and stuff, and so that was really nice. Yeah, it's really fun. I mean, I admire the whole improvisation process that you're doing because that is one of my biggest fear. Like I'm a classically trained pianist, so even at Berkeley, for example, in this improvisation class, they were like, improv now. And I was like, no, just, I like to plan things and stuff. So I'm very, very admirative to your process.
Mm.
For us, it's more, we see a scene and we have to like spot every little point and, we work with orchestra, so you kind of have to have like some sort of like a plan with like a click track and all that stuff for them to play to. So it's a bit of a different process, but it must be so fun to just improvise. I don't know, that sounds so fun.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that part is so easy, and then the other part that you do, which I've also had to do, is
Yeah.
like so overwhelming for me. To think in those terms, but it's been an amazing learning experience for me to
Yeah.
also have to do that and work with directors that you are super happy with what you did, and then they don't like it for some reason, and then you have to start cleaning it up, and you kind of fell in love with your version, and then you have to modify it completely for somebody else's vision, which is the interesting thing about this business. But yeah, I admire fully what you guys do as well.
Something.
Well, speaking of directors and kind of the way that Perrine, you were saying how it's really valuable to be able to ask them questions, but then Antonio, as you were saying, sometimes you can have these moments of kind of disconnect between what you were imagining and what they were imagining. I wonder if either of you have advice or have had experiences that have informed how you communicate with directors to kind of figure out what they're looking for and how you can approach getting to what they want.
Sure. It's very funny because I don't know how it worked for you, but I feel like for me on some projects, you can kind of tell right away if you click musically or if you don't. And no matter what, like the job needs to get done. So if you don't click musically, I think it's a little harder because you need to figure out, why don't we match? Like why is there a misconnect? And most of the time it's communication, and having to understand, like a lot of directors, they don't necessarily know the musical language, and like sometimes they will think an oboe is playing but it's really a piano, like, and vice versa. So sometimes that you get notes and you're like, what are they listening to, and it's kind of hard to decipher that. So it happens that there's a bit of a misconnect, but you have to put kind of like your musical choices on the side and listen to what they want, because at the end of the day, it's their music, it's not yours. I that's something that a teacher at Berkeley said the first day of class. It was like, it's not about you, it's about them. And that's something that I always try to remember, because they're the one that have to be happy at the end of the day. So
Yeah, and I think that's such a it can be rough on your ego in the beginning, and especially because I was always playing jazz and doing my own thing, and jazz to me is absolute freedom. You can do basically anything you want, and then to bring that into this other realm was hard, because I always feel like, okay, if I'm doing something, my instincts tell me what's the best thing for that thing, but then my instincts are just a small part of what the whole thing is going to be. So then you start getting notes, and then, like you say, sometimes they just don't know how to explain things to you, or don't know the exact musical term. Like, for example, the movie I did last year, I was trying to score this thing. He just wanted piano, the director, and he described to me more or less what he wanted, and I did a few different versions, and he's like, no, it's too slow, it's too slow. So I wanted faster. So then I would do something else that was faster, and they're like, no, we just could not get on the same page. And then I told them, can you send me a little bit of temp music of something that you might think might fit there? And then he sent me something, and it was so simple, but it had arpeggios. So when he meant faster, he meant just more motion, and then I started kind of learning his translations of what he wanted when he wanted slower was more space. When he wanted faster was just more motion in general. And then from that moment on, it started getting a little easier. But sometimes, yes, it can be very hard, especially if you're dealing with a director and then also producers and creators, that everybody has a different vision. And I've had meetings with 5 different people, and then they like email me separately. I wouldn't listen to what he said. I think we should do it more this way, like almost kind of mining each other behind everybody's back. It can be a little strange, but your job is to make make everybody happy, and sometimes you are the only one that is not happy with the end result, but that's the way things are.
Yeah.
Definitely, yeah. That even as just a kind of beginning composer for film, I can relate to a lot of these experiences. We have a question from our audience today, and they ask, as a composer, do you both prefer to score long format film features or shorter mediums, TV shows? Is there a different process for either?
Do you want to go ahead? Sorry.
Sure. Well, obviously the main difference between both formats is that in TV you can develop a thing over a season or a few different episodes, and that can be really nice, to have the chance to develop themes, to develop a language, a vocabulary that you can use, and you learn as you go along, usually, because a lot of times you don't score the whole season in one shot. You are scoring and they're creating, and then you're scoring what they're creating, and I think everybody's kind of learning at the same time what's the best thing to do, and that can be fun. When you score a film, is usually kind of pretty much finished, and then you talk it over with the director, and everything is so much more condensed, obviously. So I think both things are super exciting and really cool, but I prefer, almost in a way, the long format, so that you can really have a chance to just develop something over a longer period of time.
Yeah, I'm pretty similar to, like, I do like to have a TV show so that you have a bit more time to, like, I completely agree on this. I also think that the deadlines for movies can be very, very short. So it's like much less sleep. I mean, TV can be intense sometimes too, but I feel like we have a little bit more time than movie, when you have sometimes to come up with like 60 minutes of score, in very little time, because the deadline of the release rarely moves. And since you're the last part of, like, the whole process, if they take any sort of lateness on their process, it's basically eating away at your time. So that's like always kind of fun too.
Yeah, and I feel that even though TV is also very stressful, everybody feels like they're playing a little bit more the long game, and everybody's a little bit more relaxed in a weird way. It's not relaxed at all.
You're right, yeah.
But yeah, compared to a movie, yeah, I think the movie, everything is just so compressed, and that means stress also, the stress factor. So I think both formats are very, very unique in their own way, but as a matter of preference, I think that comes from my improvisatory mind, where just develop things with a little bit more time, and also learning the what the music can do over a longer period of time. I like that process.
Absolutely. We have another question from some of our audience here, and they ask, have either of you had issues with directors being too attached to the temp or the reference music? And if so, what were ways that you combated this?
Yes, that happens a lot. The problem is when you come, I'm sorry also if you're banging, they're redoing my roof right now. I'm so sorry about this. But
all right.
The problem when you come to a project, you're pretty late, like I said earlier, like, to the thing. So they've been used to hearing the same temp music over and over and over. And sometimes, they just fell in love with one of the cue, and it works perfectly for the scene. And it's really hard to fight that, because I mean, I can't blame them. You know, it's like I would also have a hard time liking another version if like you really got attached to this. So it happens. It's really hard. Sometimes it happens that they just end up licensing the temp if like they really can't get over that. That happens sometimes. And ways to battle that. I mean, sometimes if you really notice that like they love the temp, you can try to not replicate the same cue, but take some ideas that they have, like instrumentations, for example, or maybe it's the tempo that they like that works with the scene, or like try to figure out exactly what they like about it and kind of take that idea and then make it your own. But it is really tough when that happens.
I think that's perfectly well said. You know, you try to find elements that you think are what makes that cue that cue. You know, what makes them fall in love with it, and then try to do your own version of that without being, you know, blatantly copying something, but making and you know, for me it's all anyway. It's really hard to like replicate something. I usually, you know, my brain tells me to go in a different direction, but that can be tough if you can really tell. Yeah, and sometimes the temp music is horrible, you know, and that's the problem, that, you know, they have all this synth instrument that's just kind of sound out of whack, and you're like, really, that you really like this? So sometimes it's a little hard to fight that. With one of the weirdest things that ever happened to me was in the beginning of Get Shorty, because they wanted a lot of drums, and the temp music for for what they were sending me was Birdman. So, you know, I had to kind of redo what I did with a completely different approach. So because I didn't want to copy what I had done, so I changed as much of my sonic approach and made the drum sound completely different. But it was very incestuous, you know, to be trying to copy myself. It was just a very strange situation altogether.
I can imagine. I'm just curious because I know that temp can be kind of controversial among composers. Are you folks who like to listen to the temp before you start scoring it, or do you like to try kind of to come up with your ideas before you've heard the temp, if at all possible?
I like the temp because it kind of gives me an idea of what they want. Actually, you know what? Sometimes I like the temp when they tell you, I don't want this. You know, sometimes the temp stuff and they don't like the cue, and it actually tells you more if they don't like something. That way you're like, okay, well, I'll steer clear from, I don't know, piano and stuff that you can hear in it. But I do find that in general, it just gives you kind of a direction on what they want, you know, if it's something quirky or something that they can't really express with words. So I try not to hate it. I know it doesn't get a lot of love, but I try to like accept it and embrace it, you know. Yeah, I don't know about you, but
Yeah, same thing. I think it can be very useful, because if you like for example, that example that I was talking about, when the director wanted something piano, and when he found out, you know, when I realized it was arpeggios what he wanted, then that made it so much easier. That cue in particular, he didn't have temp music in there, and I was just fishing and fishing and fishing, and it was a lot of time wasted just trying to figure out what it was. And then the temp, even though, you know, he didn't particularly think it fit in the scene, it just gave me that very valuable piece of information that, okay, when he means fast, means more motion, and then that just kind of changed everything very quickly. So I think the temp can be very useful.
Awesome. We have a question here for Antonio from the chat, and they ask if you could talk a little bit about the tech side. Do you do all of your engineering, time coding, etc., or do you use or employ any assistants?
No, I'm a one-man show, you know, here in my little studio at home. You know, it just started happening that way, you know, that I had already been learning how to use equipment for my own projects, for my own recordings. And then when I started doing more things that required time codes and clicks and all that kind of stuff, that was a steep learning curve for me, you know. And like, for example, in the movie last year, I tried to do everything in one session. So every scene, you know, so next scene, I would just fast forward to wherever that scene was, and then I would start working on that. But then I didn't realize that if I changed the click, then everything moved in the beginning, and it just completely freaked me out, you know. And it's one of those rookie mistakes that if you're working with somebody that really knows, then they would tell you, you know, don't do that. So I started asking around, and then, you know, Pat Metheny, actually, who did a bunch of film scores, he suggested that I do every scene, you know, in a different session, just so that that's completely safe from being affected by the other scenes. And I started doing that, and then it was so much easier and less stressful. So, you know, for me, it's still a learning experience. And this movie I did last year, which was, you know, the first movie I did where there was a lot more involved, because if it's just drums, then for me, it's really easy. But this had strings. I played, you know, ukulele, mandolin, guitar, bass, all the keyboards, all the drums, strings, and all that stuff. And that was a very steep learning curve for me, because I wasn't used to doing that. But now, you know, I feel a bit more comfortable engineering and mixing. I mix everything myself too. And you know, I think it was all because thanks to all the projects that I had done for my own bands and stuff like that, that helped me get through this easier.
I felt your story about the changing click like deep in my soul, because I've had that exact thing happen, and you're just like, oh no.
Nightmare. Yeah.
We have a question for both of you here. Have there been any specific tools that have had a heavy impact on your workflow in terms of production? So I'm not sure if this refers to something perhaps like a software or just a personal practice.
I'm actually very interested in what Perrine has to say.
I'm trying to see what I'm going to say. I'm trying to think. A specific tool. I think, let's see. Well, I'm very lucky because since I'm part of Jeff's studio, I get access to, you know, a lot of all the sample libraries. Basically, you know, every new things we get them, and you know, things that I probably wouldn't be able to afford for myself yet, you know, because it's a big budget, all those things. I don't know if I have really a good answer for this. I feel like heavy impact. I think, okay, well, the thing that for me really matters is being comfortable in your DAW, whatever that is. I feel like there is a lot of like snobism for certain ones, but to me, like they're all good as long as you know what you're doing in it. Like, for example, we write in Pro Tools, like that's what Jess preferred. And like I learned with DP at Berkeley, and I was used to DP, but when I started working for Jeff, you get used to whoever you work for, you know, is used to. And now, like, I just write in Pro Tools, and some people in the industry find that really weird. But to me, it's like, that's how I can do things. And, you know, so I think for me, it's just whatever works great for you and whatever you're proficient at works. Like, it doesn't matter if it's not the cool tool or whatever, as long as it works for you, like, just do you know. I don't know if that's a good advice, but.
Yeah, no, I mean, for sure. I think for me, as a very independent producer and composer, what I found was super helpful is obviously once you learn the software, then get a really good, clear, nice template that you can just access quickly. So put all the instruments that you like, that you feel that you know, are helpful for whatever situation. If you need strings, then, you know, have all your string sounds ready, have all your keyboard and piano sounds ready. I have a bunch of different types of drums that are EQ'd differently and have, you know, do different things basically. And just have it ready and then you can eliminate things if you want to, but it's easier to eliminate than to keep adding and go into your library all the time and, oh, where was that piano that I really liked, you know, those kinds of things just makes you waste tons of time, you know, and nobody really taught this to me. So I had to learn everything the hard way. But that since I started doing that it's been really, really, really much easier at least.
Yeah, that's a really good advice. That's yeah. Yes. Yes.
Absolutely. So a couple of your collaborators have come up a couple times now. For you, Perrine, of course, Jeff Russo, and Antonio. I mean, many, but you mentioned Pat Metheny. And I'm very interested in if you have thoughts on how to make the most out of a musical collaboration, you know, how to bring the best of what you have to offer and also to bring out the best in the people you're working with to make something kind of bigger than the sum of its parts.
I think the first thing for me is put your ego on the side, because it's if you're trying to collaborate, because music is such a personal thing, right? Like I think it's so hard to detach yourself, you know, your identity to what you're writing. So I think keeping your ego on the side when you're collaborating is the best thing you could do, because you're gonna give notes to each other, and like you can't take it personally if like something, I mean, for me, the best way I progress is by someone criticizing what I'm doing, because that way it helps me, not criticizing, you know, in a mean way, but more like constructively, and being able to, you know, hear that and understanding where they come from. I think it's really hard to do that, but it's a good practice that I think a lot of people struggle with when you're an assistant and when you're starting to write additional music, because I don't know if we have a lot of that, you know, and educationally and all that stuff. And yeah, so I think for me that's the main thing. I don't know about you, Antonio.
Oh yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, because for me that was the hardest part. You know, as a jazz musician, your ego is out of control most of the time because you know they want you because of who you are exactly, you know, and a lot of times who you are is not exactly what the scene needs, you know. So or what the project needs, or whatever. They like part of who you are, but not exactly just whatever comes out of your head. So to me, that was the hardest adjustment, you know, to realize that, oh yeah, well, they're calling me because of my talents, but yeah, my talents have to be completely tailored for this other thing that is somebody else's vision, you know, and that can be a little rough sometimes. And I remember times where, you know, I would work like so hard on a scene for a few days, and also of course you want to present it for the first time in a way that is going to impress the director. So you really tweak it, you know. I would tweak it, you know, for hours and hours just to make sure that everything was perfect. And then you send it and you're like, oh my god. And then you're hoping that they were going to say, oh my god, thank you, you know, you're the best. And most of the time that's not the the case.
Yes.
You know, they tell you, well, you know, yeah, I think we're getting somewhere. And you're like, oh my god, I worked so hard on this thing all day and we're just getting somewhere, you know. And a lot of times, like I remember this scene I did for this movie I did last year, and it had a lot of strings, and I really, you know, did all the mixing myself just to for everything to come out at the right time, and I stripped it down so much that by the end I had this skeleton of what I had done. And you know, I was kind of sad because I was proud of what I did. But you know, that's what Perrine was saying. You know, you have to get rid of your ego and realize that this is not your baby. You know, you're working with somebody to make the baby as beautiful as you can, but it's not your baby, and you have to be very clear about that.
It's so true that the amount of time that you send something and you're like, I nailed this, and then they come back to you and you're like, you're getting somewhere. It's getting there. I hate that comment, because like, what do you mean it's getting there?
Potential, yeah, no, it's
Yes.
it can be brutal sometimes, especially if you really invested a lot of time and your creative self in something. Because sometimes if you detach yourself from it and you don't care so much in a way, then it's a little easier. But if you're like, oh man, this really, you know, I feel moved by this, and then I show it to my wife and she's like, oh yeah, that's so beautiful, and then they're like, nah, you know, that can be a little rough.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have like, I mean, maybe the answer is just kind of you have to just learn to take it. But do you have any particular ways that you kind of handle that sort of moment where you're like super proud of something and then it's just like no, and you're like, ah, darn.
I mean, I don't. I mean, I remember that time that I was talking about with the strings. I remember, because he was in LA time and I was here, so I was 3 hours behind. And I sent like the last revision like at 2 in the morning, and then he said, no, let's just keep working on it. And I remember I just went out and took a drive and was listening to other kinds of music like super loud and just kind of trying to cleanse myself. But it was hard. I was like personally hurt, but you have to keep reminding yourself, it's nothing personal. It's just music is just subjective. It doesn't mean that you suck. It just means that it's whatever the director who has this very particular vision, you're just not getting it yet. Hopefully you get there.
Yeah, get a punching ball and just hit it when you get this going and go back to work.
Yeah, just release some steam and you can, and then just try to take it for where it is. Nobody died, so
Yes, that's the good thing. I always remind myself, it's just music. We're not curing cancer. Let's just move on,
Right.
Absolutely. Well, we only have a couple minutes left here, so I just want to, as cliche as it might be, ask if you as people who are well established kind of in the industry, if you had advice for people who are looking to end up where you are now, what kind of advice would you give them as they go forward, trying to reach their goals?
I think there is so many different ways you can make it in this industry. You could try to find internship and do the path that I did. You can try to go the freelance route and just like try to score as many projects as possible, and then maybe one day, like one will stick and will launch. Or you can be your own artist, do your own music. And then I find that recently a lot of directors want to work with artists that already have an established identity and do their own albums. And so I feel like there's a little bit of a shift in the industry that I've just noticed, that people are not that interested anymore in working with people that can do everything, but more that has a specific identity. But I think the main thing, it's going to be hard. It's just don't be afraid of working long hours, especially at the beginning, and be very intentional. Like I think especially if you're going the internship road, paying attention to details and just showing that you're here and like you're here for the team is so important. And it's hard to find that kind of personality, I found. So yeah, give it all. And no matter what, there's so much work to be done in this industry. Like there is work for everybody. So just go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I totally agree, of course, 100% with everything Perrine said. And I think visualization is very important. Where do you see yourself, in 10 years, but also you have to, I think, play the short game and the long game. Mm-hmm. So where do I want to be in a year, and what does it take for me to do that? And then if I want to see myself in 10 years doing a specific thing, also be always aware of what steps are necessary to do that. If you want to be your own artist, then of course you have to nurture that. And if the internship route, of course, you learn all these things that I never got to learn because I was doing something completely different. So maybe you can do a healthy mix of both. It just is very personal what you want to do, but whatever you do, you can't phone it in. That's the main thing. You have to be ready to work like you never worked before, because the competition in this industry, or any other industry for that matter, is just fierce. So you have to be just aware that you're going to put in a lot of hours. But if you really like it and you're honest about what you love, it shouldn't be so hard to do that work. It's just a matter of trying to be at the right place at the right time, be prepared, obviously, and the most important thing, you have to be a nice person. that people like talking to, that people like being around, because you have to talk to a bunch of people, and personalities can really help or can really get in the way. So you have to be very aware that this is a people's business, and you have to treat people nicely, and you have to demand that they do the same thing to you.
Amazing. Well, thank you both so very much for being here. It has been an absolute pleasure to talk with both of you. And yeah, I hope that everyone is enjoying INO CON and that you enjoyed our panel, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.